Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Can y'all hear me? Good morning. Morning. Hi. Welcome. Welcome to UUCP. We are so happy to have you. I'm Mary Beth. My pronouns are she and her. At this time, if you could please silence any and all devices, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. So I have a few announcements. The first I have from Hugh Turner. He has a lunch brunch. There he is over there in the lovely red. It's Wednesday, January 11th at McGuire's, just downtown. There's only room for 4, so sign up quickly. Tell Hugh if you would like a seat at that fun table. And I always love McGuire's. It's probably the main reason we moved to Pensacola. So, true story. The next thing is a Building the Heat workshop. It's just Pensacola. So if you guys are not familiar with that, it's a wonderful charity that we have for here, and they do great things. It's regarding affordable housing, rental housing, and it says, "We know the solution now, let's win it." It is this Monday, January 9th, from 6 to 8 at First United Methodist Church. And so it's all churches. I think probably some who don't even have a church. It's a ton of people that get involved in this wonderful program. So there is, between the credenza and the name tags out there, there is a whiteboard, a calendar whiteboard for that. So it says, "Our community is in the middle of an affordable rental housing crisis. The solution we are proposing would create thousands of affordable homes for our neighbors. Join us for our Building the Heat workshop to learn not only about our solution, but how we want to win it. For this workshop, we are partnering up with the Center for Community Change." And they have, their guest is Kayla Gilchrist, and she'll be joining them as the organizer with the Community Changes Housing Trust Fund project. She's been doing that since 2021, and her role supports the expansion of resident networks as well as the housing justice campaign work of partners in the field. So yeah, check that whiteboard out there. And then Kate has an announcement, and Laura as well.
Hi, I just wanted to remind all of you that we are participating in the MLK parade on Monday the 16th. We will be announcing in the future or next week where we'll be meeting. It'll probably be meeting around 10 o'clock downtown, probably on Spring Street near Government. But we are in need of beads, so if you happen to have Mardi Gras beads hanging around your house and you haven't had any use for them, please bring them next week and donate them in the box out there in the foyer. And also next week after the service, help us decorate the float and get into the spirit of it. Thank you. Oh, and also, if you're a builder and can stay after the service today, Jack and Daniel will be building up the trailer that we have out back, so it'll be safe for us to be riding on it. Thank you.
We have quite a big weekend coming up, and I think almost everybody here, well, a lot of you are going to be involved. The Light the Darkness Music Festival, and this is the beautiful artwork that Joe designed for us. And we have about 200 of these cards for you to take home and hand out to your friends. We also have these tickets, and these tickets are kind of on the honor system. If you give them to somebody and they show up, we're going to assume that either you sold those tickets to them and you have the money, or you're treating them to the concert. So we're going to hand these out, and today after the service we're going to set up the tables, so please hang out if you are able to help with that. Any questions on the Light the Darkness Music Festival?
Can I just say something?
Yes.
So we were gone a lot of the time that this was being organized, but basically, I'm just going to say a little bit about the musicianship. So Chris is coming around 2 o'clock. So it seems like a really long day, 2 to 8, but it's got different kinds of music spread out throughout the day. So you don't have to come for the whole day. You can come for a little while. You can come, if you're only comfortable driving during the day, you can come for the first part. You can come in and out and that kind of stuff. But so we got Chris that's playing from about 2 to 3:30. So you know his style of music, or 2 or 3, something in that range. He's looking at me like, oh. But Chris is an excellent musician, entertainer, so we'll have him for the full time period to do this. Our band is playing from about 4 to 6, I think. A couple of sets, and it's kind of jazz fusion, classic rock, just nice, danceable, fun, more rocky, upbeat kind of stuff. It actually, a lot of the band came from this church, Tom and I, and then we got a bunch of friends that, really good band. We used to play down Five Sisters quite a bit, and very talented people. And then Tori Lucia, which is the Vinson's daughter, excellent singer-songwriter. She's playing around 6:30, something like that. But it'll be an excellent day of varietal music and a lot of fun. So please bring your friends and come and enjoy, and we'll have a great time. And I'm excited.
And the choir's going to do some sing-alongs with you, and then there'll be some small groups. And yours truly will be playing 2 songs. And there will be refreshments, including wine, and some craft projects to do while you're listening to music. And I want to thank all the volunteers who are making food and who are helping at the door and who are playing music and who are going to help us set up the tables after this service. Don't forget. Farron, you have a question?
2 questions. What time is the choir performing and how much are the tickets?
The tickets are a suggested donation of $15 for adults and $5 for children. But if people can't afford that, they don't have to pay that much if they feel generous and want to contribute how much it's really worth, which is thousands of dollars. We're very willing to take more. And I don't know the exact time the choir will be performing, but I will let the choir know. And the other thing, unrelated to the music festival, is that our one of our 2 annual congregational meetings is going to be after church on January 23rd. We hope to be able to provide that meeting not only in person but on Zoom. There will be no votes. This is not a voting meeting, but it is a full congregation meeting to inform everyone of what's going on and make sure everyone understands our procedures and our budgets and our progress with different things. So that'll be at 11:30. We will be serving refreshments so that you don't die of hunger by 12:30 when we're done. And all of our ministry team leaders are preparing their reports for that. So thank you all for doing those. And that's it. I would recommend you come in person if you can, because Zoom it would be Zoom. Watching the meeting on Zoom is just not as good. It's just hard in this building to get good sound. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, okay. It's the new year officially. We're in it, a weekend. So, here we go, right? 2023. Joe's going to help me light the chalice. And while we do that, if we could remember that this is a sacred space. I know this is kind of an untraditional church, but I love that about it here. And I love that we welcome everyone and we love everyone. So maybe just help us all to each other to remember that this is a loving space, a sacred space, and we're happy to have everyone here. And then now, if you all will stand, if you're willing and able, we're going to read our covenant, and then we'll have the choir come up and lead us in an opening hymn. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And if you want to remain standing, we'll have Laura and the choir come. And it's page 140, Hail the Glorious Golden City. Thank you. You may be seated. So now is the time where we'll sing the children off. And you can join me in that. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Thank you. And now it's time for our offering. I'd like to remind everyone that this is member funded. We are a member funded church, so we run on you. Thank you so much for your generosity. Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce Joe Vinson. Vinson. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Make sure that the clicker is working. Oh, that's let's see. Button on the left. Where's the button on the left? Got it. All right. Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody. Most of you know me. Good to see you all. My name is Joe Vinson. I use he, him pronouns, and I am a member of the congregation here and on the board. I am interested in local history. If you've heard me talk about this, you've probably heard me credit John Appleyard. When I moved back to Pensacola after college, I worked at the Appleyard Agency and got to know John, the storyteller of Pensacola history, and really, got an interest in our local stories here that I can't say that I had growing up. And over the years, I've done various things as kind of a very amateur historian. I started the website Pensapedia, done a few other things, but while working at the University of West Florida, I started pursuing my master's degree in public history. And one of the things that I've been interested in over the years has been vintage travel posters. We've always tried to have like a calendar of old travel posters in our house for the year. And it always occurred to me, man, it'd be great if Pensacola had something like this. Wouldn't it be neat if we could, celebrate these old buildings that we used to have? And so I started doing that, and that has become my capstone project for my public history master's degree. In October, an exhibit opened at the Voices of Pensacola building downtown with 12 posters, lots of information about the different buildings, photos and everything. And I was also in the Arts Festival this past November with prints of many of those poster designs. And one of the things about this project is that it is based heavily in nostalgia. And what is nostalgia? Well, if you recognize this scene from the show Mad Men, you may remember that Don Draper, he said that nostalgia comes from the Greek for pain from an old injury. And he's a good ad man, but he's not a very good etymologist. It means more like the pain of homecoming, of home. And so it's more like homesickness. But there is this pain that we feel from the loss of these old buildings. And nostalgia, when we talk about nostalgia nowadays, we're usually talking about when they reboot an old show that you remembered as a kid, something like that. And that's because there's currently this 20 to 30 year cycle of nostalgia. And that's because the things that you like as a kid, when you get to be old enough to have disposable income, then suddenly corporations want to market to you and get you to turn over some of that money by appealing to those memories. But many of the buildings that I'm going to be talking about here are much older than 20 to 30 years. They were gone long before I was born, much less remember growing up. And so I've been trying to think about what it is about these buildings that appeals to me. Maybe they appeal to you. I can't speak for you, obviously, but and I think it is the old wounds that we have as a community. And some of those wounds are newer than others. I'm not going to talk about it this week, but in part 2, in 2 weeks, I'll talk about the John Sunday House. That's certainly a newer wound, and that's what really got me thinking about this project as something that focuses on historic preservation. And hopefully will help a little bit with some of the organizations that do this wonderful historic preservation that we have. But today, I'm going to talk about 6 of the poster subjects. I'm going to try to keep it at a steady pace because I tend to talk more than I should. But this is going to be half of the 12 that I've designed so far, and then in 2 weeks we'll do the other half. So the first one I'm going to talk about, these are going roughly in chronological order of when they were built, was the Panton Leslie trading post. The Panton Leslie company, I should have thought more about how I was going to look at the slides here. So the Panton Leslie company was a partnership between William Panton, John Forbes, and several other mostly Scottish businessmen. They had a partnership that was located in Georgia. And as you can imagine, to be a crown loyalist during the Revolutionary War was not a comfortable position for them to be in. So in 1783, they moved to East Florida, and they moved quickly westward. In 1785, William Panton befriended Alexander McGillivray, who was a half Creek, half Scottish member of the local Muskogee tribes, and their friendship really opened up a lot of trade with the local Indians and enabled Panton Leslie to become basically a monopoly on the Indian trade. And so this headquarters was very important. Panton built a 3-story headquarters. It was really his home, but it also served as the headquarters for the company. and it was on Pensacola Bay, described as the most imposing edifice in the area, likely constructed between 1789 and 1796. That's not pictured here because, well, what we see right here is the warehouse that was converted into a residence for his nephew, John Anararity, as well as a kitchen outbuilding. These two buildings survived into the 1910s and were considered, until they were destroyed by storms, as the oldest buildings in Pensacola. The larger building, we don't have any photos of because it was destroyed in an 1848 fire. But we do have this, this drawing from 1850, a general view of Pensacola. And if you look all the way to the left there, you can see on the very, very left is that Anararity warehouse converted into a residence, that building. You can see the kitchen right next to it. And then you see these kind of jagged little columns. Those are the ruins of the larger building that were visible still 2 years after the fire. So I think it's kind of neat to see that. And one thing you'll probably all recognize is that Anararity house was honored by this replica that was built in 1955. It's on Main Street. Some people just call it the Dollhouse, but it's in front of the Blanchard Judicial Building. And it was built to conceal a natural gas regulator station. The whole area in the 1970s was converted into the Governmental Center District, and an archaeological survey by Leora Sutton revealed a lot of interesting things, and they were able to compare it to this 1801 appraisal of all the buildings that described all the building materials that they had. And that was helpful, one, to confirm what they thought they knew about the building. It helped some people create kind of conjectural, images of what the building might have looked like. And for my poster, I wanted to take that, the information that was obtained in that archaeological survey, reflected in the 1801 appraisal, and all the other things that we've learned about these buildings, and make a rendering of the buildings together. And I also wanted to respect the idea that in the late 1700s, early 1800s, Pensacola was really a borderland. Which meant that there was not a single power that had hegemony over the area. You had, obviously, this English company that came in, but this was Spanish West Florida at the time. You had lots of Creek Indians who were living in the area. And so I wanted this poster to reflect all the language cultures that were being spoken. So it has English, Spanish, and Muskogee in there. And I wanted to have kind of a Rosetta Stone, like a list of all the things that would have been for sale in the trading post. And so that was enabled by this 1783 letter that listed a lot of the things they wanted to stock in their trading post. And so the poster, I did it as a broadsheet printing, but I don't know if there was actually a broadsheet printing press in the area at that time. So we take some liberties here, but the poster looks like this. You can see that we've got some traders represented in the front with the buildings in the background, and those lists in 3 different languages. So that's kind of an example of what this project is. It's to try to create something that looks like it might have been appropriate during the time of the building's heyday, but these are all, kind of creative interpretations. So that's the Panton Leslie Trading Post. Next, we'll go on to Fort McRee. I'm going to just kind of half turn because I do need to be able to see my slides. Sorry. So the Fort McRee was built between 1834 and 1839. It was built by enslaved laborers. We have streets named after William Chase and streets named after Jasper Strong, the contractor and engineer. We don't have any streets named after the people who did all the actual work, but the people who got rich off that enslaved labor, we've named streets after them. Yeah, there's not a lot of justice here. But it was one of 3 forts, part of the 3rd system of U.S. fortifications. There were 3 forts, Pickens, Barrancas. Fort McRee was the 3rd one. It was on the tip of what is now called Perdido Key. At the time that it was built, they called it Foster's Bank, and it was a very fluid, sometimes there would be one long barrier island, sometimes it would be broken up. It was the land changed, and obviously has continued to change. During the Civil War, it was held by Confederates. Fort Pickens was the only of the 3 that was held consistently by Union forces. In a November 1861 battle, it was very badly damaged by Union gunships and Fort Pickens. And over the years after the Civil War, it remained in ruins. It was used as a kind of a borrow spot for bricks when the other forts needed repairs. But more than that, you know, the barrier islands have shifted westward with erosion, with the natural kind of flow of sands. And so for a lot of the time, Fort McRee was pretty much submerged, you know, or surrounded by water, and that really sped up the ruination of the buildings. The last significant portion was toppled in a 1906 storm, and you can kind of see, you know, little by little how this kind of crumbled. But this was before any bridges, but people would take boat excursions out, and they would still like to just go hang out on the beach and explore the ruins. And so you can imagine, you know, how fun that must have been. This shows the shoreline in 1888 compared to 1859, and you can see, does this have a, I'm not sure if this has a laser pointer. No. Anyway, you can see Fort McRee, the kind of kidney-shaped thing in the lower third there, and then the solid line to its left shows the later shoreline. So you can see that Fort McRee is essentially in the water by the late 1800s. So this is a little anachronistic, but I knew when I started this project I wanted to do at least one poster in this kind of WPA, National Park Ranger Naturalist Service poster style, and so I decided to do it for this because this is kind of the closest thing we had to a national park in the Depression. Fort McRee was never part of a national park, but there was a Santa Rosa Island National Monument that was established in 1939 by President Roosevelt. It was revoked in 1945 by President Truman when the island was returned, that portion of the island was returned to military use. But now, of course, it is part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, which was established in 1971. So this is the poster design. You can see kind of the ruins in that kind of WPA style. You can imagine people climbing up and exploring it and pointing to the lighthouse or to Fort Pickens. So that was another fun one to work on. All right, Farney Hill Place or Faraday Hill Place. I've heard locals pronounce it different ways. This was the winter home of Alexander Stoddart. And Stoddart was the Scottish-born founder of the New York Underwriters Association, an insurance man. And he invested in Pensacola starting in the 1870s. You might have called him a carpetbagger back then. But he purchased a lot of the land that was part of the new city development. Speaking of William Henry Chase, that was one of his big schemes, was to sell lots of what is now mostly considered East Hill to speculators who expected a railroad to come to Pensacola and really increase the value of the land. He had a cottage on Bayou Tahar, which he called Lakeview Cottage. And he bought this 4-block property called Greenwood Cottage that's about where 12th and Lakeview is right now, and that was called Farney Hill Place. But he did lots of improvements in the area. People would like to go up to, again, what is now East Hill, just to drive on the roads that he helped improve because they were so flat and smooth. He used kind of what were then pretty innovative techniques to, compact clay on top of a gravel bed. And he's also credited with introducing azaleas and lots of other things, lots of other plants, different fruit trees he would try out. And so he was very well respected at the time. He was kind of the Quint Studer of his time. But one of the things that Quint does that he didn't do is put his name on things. And so when they finally gave him a historical marker in the 1940s, they misspelled his name. So that's a lesson to everybody. If you want to be remembered, make sure you get your name out there correctly so that people will spell it right when they decide to honor you. So here's just some images of, you can see in that map, it's a little blurry, but that right in the middle, right above the kind of half point up, you see the Greenwood Cottage spot, and there's some photos of what the house looked like. Really, really neat place. And in the 1880s, there was a working dairy farm there. And there's Lakeview. Yeah, so here, this is a photo of one of the milk bottles that Charlie Booher, a very prolifically collecting local historian, has secured. In 1883, he starts this dairy. There's this 1887 write-up in the Florida Farmer and Fruit Grower that describes it as being one of the model institutions of Florida, having all these modern facilities and built on modern principles. The dairy closes in the 1890s. Stoddard dies in 1906, and after that, a lot of the land that is, on the bayou becomes developed as the Lakeview neighborhood. So at that time, it's a subdivision of Pensacola. The Fairney Hill Place is sold with the idea of building an apartment complex in 1925. That doesn't happen. It's torn down shortly after that, and then in 1940, a house there is built there called Fairney Hall, which is now, it remains a private residence. And for this poster, I wanted to do something that was inspired by this kind of Americana style, like almanacs, fruit, seed catalogs, things like that. And so this is what I built, made for the Fairney Hill. You can see kind of an engraving style there with the house in the background and the fountains that were visible on the property. There probably weren't cows grazing right in front of the house, but the property was very large, and in that 1887 write-up, it does describe a lot of the barns and things as being right behind the house. So this is a little bit of a creative interpretation, but it's within the bounds of reality. All right, next is Molly McCoy's. Anybody here know what Molly McCoy's was? So Molly McCoy was a madam. This building, it was purchased by Molly in 1893 for $6,500. It was not there earlier, so we're thinking that she bought the building, fully constructed. She didn't buy the land. Her previous establishment on Balin Street had been destroyed in a fire a little bit earlier. In the 1900 directory, she's one of 16 madams who's listed in the directory. That's how kind of open the red light district in Pensacola was, that, even though it was never fully legal, they were comfortable enough, putting this as their occupation in the city directory. Molly's is considered the most famous, the most well-regarded of all the bordellos in the red light district, which was called the Line. So people would go walk the line if you had a sporting man in that time period. And this obviously catered to the sailors. Pensacola was a very busy port, and so the sailors were certainly part of the clientele, but also the local boys. It was part of a kind of a rite of passage to go to the line. And it's called the Line because West Zaragoza Street is kind of the hub, and it's a little bit north and a little bit south, a little bit east and west, but basically it's so concentrated. In the 1907 Sanborn fire insurance maps, there are 18 buildings in like a 2-block diameter that are marked FB. FB is the code in Sanborn insurance maps for female boarding house, FB. But if you see one on its own, okay, it's a female boarding house. If you see 18 in a 1-block area, you can read between the lines and figure out there's more going on there. So this is that map, and if you look closely, you can see just FB, 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 FB. It was a line, like it was called. And a little bit about Danton Walker. So a lot of what we know about Molly's comes from Danton Walker. He was a kind of a Broadway and early Hollywood gossip columnist who spent some of his youth here in Pensacola. He has a memoir called Danton's Inferno, where he talks about staying near where we had our camp with the church camp up near Tannenheim. He stayed there with the Hecker family. And he describes a trip to the Line, describes Molly McCoy, a large, stout woman of about 60, dressed in black lace. Her hair, a weird shade of pink, was worn in a high pompadour, and her face was heavily rouged. Her puffy hands sparkled with small diamond rings. Not the most flattering description of Molly, but he's much more complimentary to the building itself. The ceiling was high, and the windows floor-length, masked by curtains of cherry-colored satin. The walls were papered in gold, and there were gilt chairs upholstered in a fabric the same color as the curtains. A wood fire burned brightly beneath a white marble mantel, causing a lively sparkle among the crystal ornaments of the chandelier, from which were strung red ribbons and Christmas bells. Really, charming description. He comes back later, a few years after this. He was there, by the way, as a teenager to audition to be the piano player, the professor of the establishment. He comes back later after Molly has died and the neighborhood, the district has really kind of declined. Molly died in 1920. The district, like I said, has this kind of long period of decline. Ultimately, it shut down in 1941 when the U.S. Navy does a quarantine. We're on the eve of war at that point, and they're very worried about VD. And so they closed the district. At that point, the street, you can imagine, it doesn't have great connotation for people who may want to invest there. So they decided to rebrand it. This is an early rebranding exercise. They call it Liberty Street. And this building becomes the Liberty Hotel for a short while. But then it becomes the Waterfront Rescue Mission. They buy the building in 1950. They had an appropriate motto for the building. It was, I was a stranger and you took me in, which certainly. And in 1966, the building is torn down. Some of those bricks are used in the construction of the one-story Waterfront Rescue Mission building that was there until they built their new building off of Fairfield. But that's where that is. Now it's a parking lot, so the Joni Mitchell song is appropriate. But yeah, it's a parking lot for the Bodacious Brew. And of course, in 2022, the street was rebranded again. Anyone know the name? It's Fred Levin Way. And I think it's funny that basically the entirety of what was the red light district, that portion of West Zaragoza is now called Fred Levin Way. I think that Fred was cognizant enough of Pensacola history that he would get a kick out of being having that street named after him. So for this poster design, I'm trying to think of why any of these posters would exist. And in New Orleans, there's a red light district called Storyville. And in Storyville, if you went there during that time, you would want to pick up a blue book. It was a guide that would help you know where to go, where to avoid, where you might get stabbed and robbed. And so you would get a blue book, and this would have ads in it. And the slogan of the blue book of Storyville, reflected in the blue book, is this down here: "On soit qui mal y pense." Sorry if I butchered that French. It means shame on anyone who thinks ill of it. And that was the slogan of the Order of the Garter. And so in my design, basically I'm pretending it's an ad for a blue book that might have existed in Pensacola's red light district. And that's the poster. Danton, when he describes going to Molly's, he says that her name was in gilt lettering on the glass door. And so that's why her name is in gold lettering right there. And we've got the slogan along the side. So I tried to do a little more justice. Again, I don't know what Molly looked like, but tried to be a little more flattering to her than Danton was in his description. All right, the Pensacola Opera House. The Pensacola Opera House is a beautiful building with a mansard roof. It was financed by Daniel F. Sullivan, who was one of the many lumber magnates who made their fortune on timber here before they cut it all down. And it was built by AV Clubs for around $50,000. Opens in 1883 with the Merry War. And it serves as the primary theater for Pensacola for decades. Every kind of entertainment comes here. You've got, obviously, operas, a lot of things that would be maybe more closer to opry. You've got, vaudeville shows, minstrel shows were something that would have been performed here frequently, different plays, and they had speakers. And one of those speakers was Booker T. Washington. He came here in 1900. He spoke to a packed house. It was a mixed audience. Black and white people turned out. The mayor introduces him. And he is a very well-respected and well-regarded speaker. But one of the things about this project is that the buildings where we live and work, they reflect the state of the community. And so in this photo, you can see there's one set of big double doors on the right there. That's the only entrance. 5 years after Booker T. Washington speaks here, there's a renovation. 1905 is also the year that in Pensacola, Jim Crow laws for streetcar segregation originate from our Pensacola legislators. And so statewide, streetcars become segregated in 1905 because of the local legislation. And in 1905, there's a renovation of the Opera House that adds 2 sets of doors on either side of that main set. And that allows all sorts of segregation by race, by class. And so if you go in one set of doors, you don't have to interact with the people who go in the other set of doors. And so that's what I mean when I say that, the buildings, they reflect the character of the community, for good and bad. And I'll just speak a moment about the process. So I I don't like to trace photos. I use the photos as reference, but what I'm doing is I'm taking the reference photos that we have of these old buildings, and I'm taking them into a piece of software called SketchUp, and I'm trying to recreate them in 3D using those reference photos. So that's a screenshot of what you see here. And for the Opera House, I was lucky because there's actually a newspaper article that describes how many feet long it is in all the dimensions, and so it really helps with the scale. And so I was able to make a fairly detailed and I think accurate recreation of what this building was like, and then I used that, get that original perspective, and use that for my illustration. Another thing about the Opera House, one of the famed performers who came here was Sarah Bernhardt. She has one of the last performances at the Opera House. It's also one of her last performances during her last American tour in 1917. And she was really one of the original celebrities. When we think about people like Tom Cruise today, who have been in the spotlight for decades. At this point, Sarah Bernhardt had been a celebrity, a worldwide celebrity since the 1860s, so she's in her 5th decade as a celebrity. And just like Tom Cruise, at a certain point, the public kind of relishes being able to see them age and falter. And so in 1915, she has an injury that where she requests one of her lovers to amputate her leg because of the chronic pain that she experienced. And the local media was pretty cruel to her in this way that I think we can now understand better with celebrity culture being what it is. The local interviewer just says how interesting it is that one with so little claim to pulchritude meaning beauty, could sway the hearts of men and women as she had swayed them. And Sarah Bernhardt, I think, was widely considered a very, very beautiful woman, especially throughout her career as a whole. But she is Jewish, and that's one of the things about her is that she is changing the way that Europe, especially, sees Jewish beauty. And just real quick, while she's here, this is the state of the Opera House. It's already been damaged by a hurricane. According to Danton Walker, a piece of scenery falls down while she's performing and lands on her head. So we very nearly had the ignominious distinction of being the city that killed Sarah Bernhardt, but that didn't happen. And at the end of her performance, Clay Armstrong gave her a potted plant. But this idea of Sarah Bernhardt being kind of the epitome of Jewish beauty is perpetuated and helped by Alphonse Mucha. Alphonse Mucha is this very well-known Art Nouveau illustrator who is living in France and becomes basically her guy. He does one poster for her, and it's so well received that she says, I'm going to hire you, you're going to keep doing my posters, and they have this wonderful partnership for many, many years. And in many of the posters, you can see the Stars of David that are reflected in the design motif. There's a lot of other kind of nods to her ancestry, and so it's really kind of an interesting way of that, bringing that identity to the forefront. And he is a stone lithographer, which is such an interesting art form. It allows such nuance and color that was not really prior to that available to printmaking. But one of the other things is that we have some of the surviving documents from this program here, and that enabled me to make a poster. I was trying to copy Alphonse Mucha's style, and I was able to include the specific things that she performed. So that's the poster for the Opera House with Sarah Bernhardt, and the different things that she performed at that spot. You can see she has the cane because of her amputation. She's holding a camellia because that's one of the pieces that she performed. And camellias are I'm partial to camellias as well, inherited through my dad. And anyway, so that's the Opera House. All right, I think this is the last one. Sorry if getting close on time. All right, the towers. So the towers at Cordova Park, everyone knows Cordova Park, but Cordova Park, the neighborhood, is kind of the successor of a proposed development by the Bars family. Around 1900, the Bars family, Henry Bars, is another timber magnate, very wealthy, and he he buys land for his wife whenever she asks for a gift. That's the family lore, is that she would just say, just buy me a little land. And they end up with all this land around what is now Cordova Park, the neighborhood, and the Cordova Business District. And in 1900, they built the summer getaway house. And at that time, this is before we really know exactly what's causing yellow fever. And so a summer getaway house was really, you got away from the city so you didn't catch yellow fever. And over the years, this house has expanded. They call it the towers because of these octagonal things around the original house, but they expand the house and they build this beautiful garden with turrets that look like, castle towers. A beautiful garden. And they wanted to sell lots around the house where wealthy Northerners could come and buy these kind of turnkey houses. And they have this brochure, this beautiful color brochure. So you can see in this plat map there, along the bottom, that's the 12th Avenue Bridge, where that is now. So imagine if you were crossing 12th Avenue, crossing the bayou to go up the hill towards the airport. Instead, you've got this windy subdivision with these really big, over 1 acre each lots. And that land company was chartered in 1899. The houses would have been included with the lot for up to $8,000, which really isn't that much money adjusted for inflation. The max of like $280,000. I'd get that deal. But it had this beautiful brochure that showed the clubhouse they were going to build. It has shades of Mar-a-Lago and that kind of style, and some of the house plans and renderings of it. So it would have been a really neat thing to have, but it kind of fizzled out. The location of the towers was on where Woodbine connects into Gerhardt, just kind of east and south of Bars Park. After the Bars family move out in 1957, some teenagers break in and wreck the place pretty well, and the building is torn down shortly after that. You can see it's on parcel A on that lower right-hand side there, lower left-hand side, excuse me. For this poster, I wanted to do something in an arts and crafts style. There are two kind of arts and crafts movements or styles. There's William Morris in England and the Roy Crofters Guild in the US. And so I tried to merge those styles. And here's the Cordova Park poster with the towers. Kind of merged some of those things. I took the rose motif that the Roy Crofters used and added some pine cones and pine straw. And so that's the first half, and we're right about time. The other 6 will include, we'll go over in 2 weeks. They'll include the John Sunday House, the San Carlos Hotel, the Frisco Passenger Depot, the Spanish Village, the Spearman Brewery, and Abe's 506 Club. So if you're interested in learning more, join us again in 2 weeks. But that's it for today. I've got prints, like I said, of some of these, and I've also got calendars. If anyone's interested in getting a calendar, you can talk to me after the service. And I'll be happy to sell you one. But that's it for me.
Thanks, Joe. We'll have Laura and the choir join us for one more hymn. If you are willing and able to stand, please stand and join us in singing number 143, Not in Vain, the Distant Beacon. Thank you, everyone. Go in peace. Have a great week.